Hello everyone, Sandra here, and you can see me, yay! So I have added a webcam and a microphone stand, which is the important part of this. It's a bit narrow, so you can't really see me pointing to it, but it's over here. Boy, where to get fingers. Okay, enough about that. So here we are, Astral Collision. Let's make a game. I'm making it in RPG Maker. It's called Astral Collision. This is some sort of wonky intro. It'll probably be a little bit smoother in the future as I get used to having webcam on and all that. I guess normally we look at the world, though, don't we? All the way zoomed out here so we can see everything. So there's been a lot of stuff that's gone on this past week, which is a nice change of pace, but we've gotten this good old thing built, so that has freed up a lot of time to not have that be something I'm working on. So let's go ahead and start. Where do I start? So there's been a lot of significant changes that have been going on kind of behind the scenes. I've not really done any map work, but I've been focusing on sort of the initial experience. So for that, one of the big things that I've been focusing on is sort of, how do I phrase this? The initial loadout and the initial way things work. I did change the way getting knocked out works. You'll notice that right now it says TP charge times 0 and TP regeneration minus 100%. I want you to fully lose MP and TP when you die. I did a bunch of that in code. Over here in this die function, it sets MP and TP to 0. I was just testing it to make sure it works, and it does work. But one of the issues that I was noticing is that you will, like, when this thing is applied, I'm gesticulating with my out-of-camera finger, but when this thing is applied right here, what ends up happening is that the damage that killed you can cause you to gain TP right after you die, so you end up with a little bit of TP, which I don't want, which is why I added that functionality to the death thing. I was just testing that just before recording to make sure it worked. So after that, I've, like, in terms of what I've actually been working on mostly, though, there's been a lot of stuff. So I finished, I've been working on some of these. I'll go over these in a moment. But I finished going through all of these and figuring out what I wanted to do with them. You can see that I have pinned the A columns. That way I could scroll over when I was working on this to see what things were named. But I went through and I tweaked all of the equipment. We can talk about some of those things in just a moment, but if I go to armors, you'll notice that there's 4 right here: rusty, frayed, tattered, and old stuff. I'm going to talk about those in a moment, eventually. But I've gone through and I've gone ahead and tweaked all of these things. So things like steel plate mail now have the proper way that it modifies your HP and all that good stuff. But what I've done for a couple of these, so a bunch of these I'd already kind of covered. Yeah, the necklaces are fine, capes are fine, etc. I don't remember what all I hadn't done at the time. I added a little bit of MP regeneration to the dress, just a small amount, as something that it will do, and also body armor boosting TP gain rate. I want that somewhere, and that seemed like a good place to put it. Hats, I figured yeah, because a lot of this was empty. I liked the combs, and the circlet was fine, but a lot of this was empty. So what I've ended up doing, I just kind of go through these. Hats are going to give you a little bit of HP and MP, and they can reduce damage from an element and the associated conditions. So the default one reduced blind and light. So light damage and light damage type inflicts blind. So blind is the associated condition with light. So I made it so that way. That's just kind of the general association that hats have, is those reductions. Then the standard helmet, I've kind of adjusted a bit. So it gives you a bit of HP, and then it reduces the damage from 1 or more physical types by a maximum of 20%, and it can protect from stun, which is technically called stagger, but it's the state that basically makes you lose your turn. So what this basically means is the 1 or more physical types, combined max of 20%, is it can reduce striking, piercing, or slashing damage by, and however much it reduces those by, the sum of them should not exceed 20%. So it can reduce say one of them by 5%, another by 15%, or one of them by 20% straight up, or all three by like 6% or something like that. So it can kind of mix and match, but it shouldn't get above 20% total that it's reducing things by. Then the helmet just straight up reduces all physical damage taken by 10%. So this is physical attacks. This is the physical category of damage rather than the physical damage types. And then it also gives you a little bit of HP and can also reduce conditions by the chance of being afflicted by a condition, by up to 50%. Same sort of deal as the physical damage types up here. And then the pointed hat can reduces magical damage taken by up to 20%. It gives you some HP, some MP, and it can stat boost an elemental stat. So that's fire, water, wind, or earth. The circlet and comb are the same. Ribbon, I had to spend some time trying to figure out what I was doing with this. I decided that I was going to change it to giving you a lot of MP. So rather than reducing the chance to be affected by conditions by 10% for each condition, which is pretty insignificant, I gave it a cause to give you a bunch of MP, and also an up to 50% chance to prevent being affected by an enchantment. I thought might be an interesting way to go, because you might want to be able to prevent yourself from being affected by them. It's a weird spot, but I'm fine with it playing in that headspace. Headbands, I decided that I want them to improve plus stats by, that 10 to 20% range. What I mean by plus stats is if we go into here, on param, there's the parameter, SP parameter, and exp parameter. Right here, you'll notice these have asterisks, which is used for multiplication, whereas this has a plus sign. So these are plus stats. These are the stats that headbands will modify. They will not modify these stats or these stats. That's the general idea behind them. So one of them is hit rate, which is basically accuracy. There's evasion, critical rate, critical evasion, which reduces the chance that you'll be hit by a critical hit, or reduces the chance that an attack against you will be a critical hit, is more accurate. Magic evasion, magic reflection, counterattack, and then the regenerations. So those are the stats that headbands can modify. Goggles, I'm like, I don't know, just be thematic with these. Night vision goggles is the default one that I have. It gives you a bunch of accuracy, some additional critical rate, but it makes you more vulnerable to blind, less vulnerable to darkness, but super more vulnerable to light. So it's just kind of a mixture of things. The night vision goggles are pretty strong. And then I was trying to figure out what the difference between my shield types were. So I have metal shields and wooden shields. What I've kind of settled on is that metal shields are more for blocking, and wooden shields are more for countering. So as you can see here, the guard effect should go quite high with metal shields. Every 100 here decreases the damage you take while guarding by +1 to the denominator. So the guard formula that I'm working with, not the inbuilt one, I'm not using the default guard formula. I have my own defined right here. Apply guard. So what this does right here is damage divided by 1 plus your guard value. So if you have 100 guard, then this is 2. 200 guard would be 3, so on and so forth. So this is your damage is taken down. So just guarding normally will take your damage down to half. If you have 200% guard, it'll make it a third. 300% guard would be a quarter. 500% guard would be a fifth. 500% guard would be a sixth. So it decreases damage. Obviously, as you can tell, having just guarding by itself is a dramatic decrease. This right here takes your strength stat in half, floors it, and then subtracts that from the damage you take. So while guarding, you take dramatically less damage. I should probably, actually, while I'm thinking about this, math.max between that and 0. This line of code, which I've just added, just means that this guarding cannot reduce the damage you take below 0. I don't want you to be able to heal yourself by guarding. So I have modified that just now because it crossed my mind to do so. But yeah, so your strength decreases the damage you take while guarding as well. Just a hidden property of strength. Strength and dex, and like all of them have properties associated with them. So that's guarding. So metal shields dramatically increase this this value is the idea. So they have a much stronger effect there. Whereas wooden shields, that is not the note document. Wooden shields are supposed to grant a little bit of guard effect, but mostly they're supposed to give a lot of counterattack. So they're more of a parry shield than a guarding shield, if that makes sense. And then the idea here that evasion normally will also decrease the damage you take, so really good guard effect from our metal shields here should potentially come with the cost of decreasing your evasion, so that way you can block better. And then focuses they give you a lot of MP, and then they focus on what this right here is how many elements are they increasing? If they increase one element, they increase it as a superior. If they increase 2, it's as a major, 3 as a minor, and all 4 elemental stats, it's just a boost. So I've gone through and I've modified all of the equipment accordingly. And then there's been a few more of these weapons that I've kind of gone through. Gloves, the way that these work, it's not properly reflected over here. Here, let me actually just go to them in-game because that'll be easier to discuss, where I have boxing gloves. I don't know how many different types of gloves there's realistically going to be in the game. So boxing gloves, they now give you some additional TP when you hit, equal to 1/10 of your fire stat. But they also notably now give you your TP gets added to your damage. So the damage range here is 0.6 times your TP, and then this is 65 plus just straight up your TP. So the more TP you have, the harder boxing gloves hit. This can make them quite powerful, without much stat investment, because, so keep in mind, so max TP in my system is different. So by default, maximum TP is 100. All right. So if you've played or if you've worked with RPG Maker, you know this. The max by default is 100. I have gone and I have made a math formula out of it that combines your strength, your dexterity, and your fire stats to make your maximum TP. So your maximum TP varies. So boxing gloves are kind of capped by what your maximum TP is, but they are quite an effective weapon in the little bit of testing I did with them, particularly on a character with high fire, because then they're going to have higher TP and they charge their TP more quickly. So these are quite strong. That's what I've done with boxing gloves, but that's not easy to reflect over here at all. The spear, I have made it so that way it just takes the average of your physical stats, your strength, and your dexterity for the min, and then the maximum is the sum of them plus an additional 10. That's what's going on with the spear. The club, I've mostly left the same. However, I have made it so that way when it critically hits, you gain TP equal to your fire stat, rather than any other sort of property going on. Whereas the pipe, its damage isn't quite as good as that, as the club, but it's also just based on your strength. But then your critical multiplier is based on your dexterity. So the more dexterity you have, the more its crits hit harder, and then it has somewhat lowered accuracy. So this is a really important thing to remember about the system. Accuracy does not straight up determine hit chance. It does to an extent, but you have to really fumble your hit to not hit, where your opponent has to have a really high evasion. What these effectively do is they scale your damage. So this is really important. This is an important refresher on how this all works. So let me find where I do this. I would think it's somewhere. Where is it? I need to find where this math happens, because the accuracy stuff is important. This is where we calculate hit chance. Apply. Yeah, it's right here. So what we see is this hit multiplier, and it's the item hit chance times some additional math. So yeah, this scales. So the hit multiplier is basically it's a 0 to 1 of whether or not you hit. And you can see this math here. It says, determine this attack's final accuracy. It'll be somewhere on the interval accuracy and 1. This value will later be multiplied against the damage value to determine how hard we hit. This system means that it is unlikely for attacks to straight up fail. Rather, they're more likely to do less than full damage. They can also do more than normal damage if you get your accuracy high enough. So this is a value between 0 and 1 inclusive. And yeah, as you can see, it's on the interval accuracy and 1. So if your accuracy is less, so what this does is this finds your accuracy of your attack found right here. So this is how accurate your move is multiplied by 1 minus your hit. So this is a linear interpolation sort of thing. It's a little bit hidden because it's this is being added on. But this whole system, if I remember correctly, is basically like this is the maximum accuracy of your thing, and it's being multiplied by how well you hit. So if you rolled a 1 on this, then it'll be 0 times this, and it's just the hit mult, right? Whereas if you got like a 50% accuracy, then it's half of your accurate rate plus that 50%. So the way this kind of functions differs depending upon whether or not your item hit rate is greater than 1 or less than 1. If it's less than 1, then this effectively means that lower accuracy, like it basically scales from the low end of your hit rate up to the accuracy. So if you have 100% hit, then you get 100 hit. If you have a 50% hit, then it's 50% of your thing's accuracy plus 50%, right? If you have a 0, or if you have a 0 on this, then it's just whatever your item's accuracy is. That's your accuracy. If your accuracy is really high, then that means you're going to hit harder, and so the low end starts becoming your it works a little bit wonky. So the low end becomes 1 if your accuracy is over 100. So basically what this means is that if your accuracy is super duper low, you have a chance to miss. So if the hit multiplier is less than 0.1, you have a chance to miss. So that means your accuracy has to be like the item hit accuracy has to be like really low, and then you have to get a bad multiplier on your thing. So it is possible to miss. It's just very unlikely. And here we have evasion. So some random value times evasion is subtracted off of the hit multiplier. So this reduces the damage that you take on an interval 0 to evasion. That's how this works. And so we reduce the damage taken. Again, if the multiplier is less than 0.1 at this point, then the attack has been evaded rather than straight up missing. And then we take the damage and we multiply it by this hit mult. So what this means is that low accuracy just means that the damage range, because accuracy is not, there is a mischance associated with it, but accuracy is more a measure of how hard you hit rather than, and like the damage range for your attack, rather than it is chance to hit, if that makes sense. So this is really important for the functioning of this. It's really important for understanding a lot of things, that this is what's going on here. So if we go back into our weapon, having lowered accuracy here on the pipe, so your default accuracy is 100. Subtracting 33% off means that your accuracy rate is slightly lower. So that means that your range has a lower end to it, if that makes sense. Which just means that the pipe has more of a range of damage that it will deal. It's not necessarily always going to be like the full standard amount of damage. So that's what that means, is the pipe's damage has a broader range. That's long-winded, but we'll get back to where that's relevant later. The other weapons we've all seen. Okay, so now that I've gone through all of that, what's really important to discuss now is I've been doing a lot of thinking about the early game. I've been doing some playtesting with the early game, and there's been a lot of stuff that I have been evaluating. One of the big things is feeling like the game was a bit too easy right off the bat, if that makes sense, and not quite sure how to kind of balance some of that. So there's a couple of things that I want to address. The very first one is gear. I figured that the first part of the game needs to be finding better equipment, and for finding better equipment, I need to give you some equipment that's not as good. So I did some calculations. They are over here. So you can see a bunch of colorful stuff right here in this range. So basically what this is I took down all of the classes, and I wrote down all of their weapons that they can use, and some of them are colored. Energy Sword is colored like this to differentiate it from Sword because it has the word sword in it, and the way that the coloring worked here was just the auto thing, so that's what's going on with that. And then I also went through all of the chest armor. So I wanted to figure out what is roughly the minimum number of items that I can make in order to cover all of the character classes. Sage is not on here because Sage can literally use everything, so it's redundant to put it on here and would just make the list really wide. So what I found is the combination of sword, you can see them right over here, and actually I did the pipe, so this should go ahead and be filled in. But the armors of plate mail, tunic, dress, and gambeson cover all of the classes. There potentially have been other combinations as well. Things like jacket might have been able to cover, but like robe would have been able to potentially cover instead of dress. Yeah, it would have been. But I felt like dress was a slightly more interesting choice than robes. And then weapons, I decided on sword, dagger, pipe, staff, and tome. Some of this was really tricky because the warlock, for example, has a very specific set of weapons, and tome felt the least non-standard, if that makes sense. Dagger seemed a pretty straightforward one to go with. Sword seemed pretty straightforward. Pipe also ended up being kind of the choice that I felt was best here. It gets the overlap with the Berserker and the Special Forces. I'm not going to start you off with a chainsaw. That's a bit ridiculous. That weapon type is inherently powerful early game. So I didn't want to start you off with something like that. So there's a lot of different options. I checked Scepter, but Scepters aren't that heavily used. Staff is everywhere. So in the end, I went with those ones. So what I ended up doing is I made some less good versions of those. So we have the Rusty Dagger. And the way that these are less good is they have minus 50% hit rate. So normally you wouldn't have minus 50% hit rate, but these do. And that makes them deal less damage on average, right? Because it's basically having the damage range. Rusty Sword, also, like all of these are just minus 50%. There is, whoops, I clicked too far. You'll notice that the pipe here has a really bad range because of that, because the default is minus 33%. Minus 50 on top of that makes it really low. This just means this has a very broad range, and this is an incredibly inconsistent weapon damage-wise. And then the makeshift staff and tome are very similar. They both deal omni damage and use the formula of all of the things added together and divided by 4 or 2 for the min and max. So the staff and the tome, these guys are going to deal the same amount. The staff has a slightly better crit rate. I don't know. What do you want here? The tome is probably a little bit better because of the magic reflection, but like it says, it can poorly channel any element. So I went through and I did that. I also went through and made my mediocre armors. So we have the Rusty Plate Mail, which has much worse stats than Plate Mail normally has. Same with the tunic, the dress. Although this dress actually has a very strong recovery effect. The rest of its stats are very bad. I like my flavor text here, though. But now it's mostly rags. Maybe the right marketing could make it fashionable. And then the old Gambeson, of course, being a bit weaker. This actually increases the damage you take from water, but because a lot of the early game water is going to be healing attribute rather than a damage attribute, it actually has a secret property of maybe slightly increasing the amount of healing you receive. So I made these for starter equipment, stripped out all of the other equipment that characters were getting, and gave them stuff. So sword and plate mail went to a number of them, tattered dress, it's just, I'll scroll through these just to give you a chance to kind of look at them as you may care to. But so I went through all of that. Also have done a few tweaks to skills. Guarding Strike was really... So, I've been thinking a lot about what skills you have right at the start. And I'll be talking about that more in a moment because it's going to come up in a moment. But Guarding Strike was a skill that felt really underperformant to me. I just never had a reason to use it. It dealt slightly less damage and would often come out after other things had attacked, so I wasn't really getting the guard effect from it very well either. So I did a couple of things. I removed the decreased damage because you're spending some extra TP. You should, you're doing that for the guard effect. And it doesn't do any plus damage, right? Weapon skills generally, like attack skills, generally deal additional damage. This one skips additional damage in favor of giving you guard. But like I said, the other thing that I was running into is, well, the guard would end right away. So I also went into, which reminds me I'm going to need to modify another skill. While I'm thinking about it, I'm going to do this. So actually, well, I'll get it to just a second. So I made a 2-turn guard that it's identical to the guard state, except it lasts 2 turns instead of 1 turn, which is very useful for the purposes of the skill we were just talking about over here, Guarding Strike, because it means that I can make that last until your next turn, which suddenly makes the skill a lot more useful. If you keep Guarding Strike, you're going to keep guarding, and you're going to take reduced damage. If you have a good shield, you're going to be perpetually taking way less damage as a result, but you're not doing anything else, right? I don't know how strong this will end up being, but it's a way more compelling skill, which is what my goal was. Now, there is a guard break skill in Special Forces right here. So I want to have this also remove that state that I just made the guard 2 turns state, because it should break that as well. Enemies use Guarding Strike, so that becomes very important. Okay, so that's that. I also went through... Magic in general has felt like it's a little too cheap, like you can use it too much. There's a couple of things I did to specifically try to address that. One of them is making it so that way you don't have starting equipment that gives you a bunch of extra MP. But one of them is I've made a few spells more expensive, and that's something I'm going to tweak over time. But right here, I made Fireball cost 10 instead of 5, but I also gave it an additional base 50 damage, which is going to make it a lot stronger in the early game anyway. This is going to get washed out, or not entirely washed out, but it's going to become a lot less significant later game. But I'm probably going to do this to a number of spells, is to just give them some raw additional value, so that way they're stronger early in the game than they are, especially early spells. And I want to potentially look at the spell crafting, or the caster weapons, because finding a good balance between attacking and casting is something else that I really need to do. This is probably kind of loud for you. Let me turn this down a bit. So I will want to look at other stuff as I go on, but there's a number of these earlier spells that I have made more expensive. Water Pulse is another one that I'm strongly considering adding, or not Water Pulse, Healing Spring. Strongly considering adding some plus value to, just that way it can be a bit more effective of an early healing spell, particularly on characters with lower water stats, but I'm not entirely committed to that just yet. So I've done that to a number of spells. I modified how Meditate works, so that way you lose all of your TP still, but the amount of MP you gain is not equal to the TP you lost, because one of the things I was noticing, on the Telenergist especially, is that character doesn't have much TP, and so you would gain some TP, for sure, but what would end up happening is you have a cap of like 30 TP or something, and it's like, well, I can spend a turn to convert maybe 30 TP to MP, but that just feels super inefficient. So I made it so that way it restores MP on a percentage basis. So this will restore some percentage of your max MP based on the percentage of the TP that you lost, rather than the straight raw value. And yeah, otherwise there's been some increases to some of the costs of some of the spells because I wanted to make just attacking better. Part of what I can do to make attacking better too is just make the caster weapons deal more damage, and that's something that I'm probably going to look at as well, particularly on a plus value angle is really important. And then there's been a couple of other small tweaks to things as well. Notably, I made Draining Dark deal less damage. I halved the damage that it deals, but also decreased its MP cost a bit for that. It was just dealing way too much damage early game. Like, again, it's one of those things of, like, how much damage do I want the player dealing early game? Well, I don't want the first spell that you start off with the Warlock one-shotting standard starting area enemies at level 1. That's a little too much, and I want this to be a bit more of a bread-and-butter spell as well, so I made it cheaper to cast so it can kind of fill that role. Okay, that's a lot of talking about some of those things. I'm going to hit save just to make sure I've saved. Let's talk about the early game experience. So you'll notice that I have a number of skills struck off here. That's because I have been doing a lot of thinking about what is the first game experience like. When I am starting up the game and I'm doing a new game, what skills do I have available to me? I want these first 5 skills, especially, to absolutely reflect the core gameplay style of this class. And the issue that I've been running into is that they don't, by and large, do that. So if I... where do I want to go for this? Yeah, it's classes. If I look at Knight, we see, what is the Knight focused on? Buffing allies and debuffing enemies, right? And that's using the buff and debuff system. What is the Whammo focused on? Well, it's an attacking support character whose support skills are TP based. The Telenergist does stuff based on MP and has a lot of utility. The Prismage is focused on AoE. The Sorcerer is focused more on single targets and some debuffing enemies, and so on and so forth. Like, all of these have some thematic element that I've added as I've been trying to figure out, okay, what do I make their standard skills? And I need to reflect this philosophy in the first 2 skills that they have and in the first 5 skills that they get. Because one of the things that I've come to realize is a serious problem when I'm playing is that there's a lot of things where the initial set of skills, like, as a whole, taken in aggregate, the skills will work, I think, for a lot of these classes. But the initial skills need to work by themselves to be able to convey what this class is about. What does it feel like? How does it function? And one of the things that I have come to realize is a big problem, and I may want to shift some stuff around to kind of help with this, but just at large. But one of the things that's a big problem is that is not what is happening. The classes are not appropriately representing what it is that they are about. Some of that comes from, like, the Telenergist getting Meditate super early. Meditate is not useful early. It's not useful, and the change I made to it was to make it more useful, but it's decidedly an uninteresting skill early, and I'm already going to be getting Balance MP anyway. I don't need Meditate floating around here too. It's a fine skill, but it's a skill that should come later. So earlier, I want something like Comforting Earth or Absorption or something. I'm probably going to swap it with one of these guys here. Likewise, Commendation is what the Whammo class was about. Like, you would always open up with Commendation. And that's not what the Whammo class is supposed to be about. So I'm going to want to shift this later. I'm not 100% sure what I'm shifting earlier. I was thinking that I might move Guarding Strike here, and then put Mystic Strike here and Commendation back here. I'm not entirely sure on that. But Commendation is a very useful skill, and there's no reason to not use it at the start of every battle. And that's one of the other things that this brings me to. I want to make it so that way most of these initial skills, unless the profession is specifically about buffing, whether self-buffing or buffing allies or whatever, I want to make most of these initial skills not buffing skills. Because when most of your skills are buffing skills, it turns the game into a bunch of setup. And it also means that once you use them, you kind of don't have any purpose to use them again until they wear off, right? Like, if I've honed Weapon on the Knight, and this is crossed out because, again, I want to move it later. Struck out skills need to be moved to be obtained later for various reasons. So if I'm honing weapon early, like I hone weapon and then what? This is just a skill slot that I'm not doing anything with, and that's fine later in the game. But earlier in the game, that's not good gameplay. It means that you spend too much time just sitting there with like, okay, well, I have this skill that I use once at the start of battle, and then I don't use it again. And when I have a limited number of skills, when I have 2 skills, 3 skills, that's just not very interesting. So I don't want any of the early skills to be skills that you only really want to use once, and then you're kind of done with it. I want them to be skills that you will repeatedly be happy to use. Skills that you will you use multiple times in a battle and things like that. So I'm just going to need to go through all of these professions and kind of evaluate, okay, what are you about? And one of the things that I'm probably going to do is I'm going to shift some of these skills that are green, which are the shared common skills. I'm probably going to shift at least one of them later, so that way, I mean, I kind of like the balance of things, but it's just more important that what the profession is about be focused on early, and I need to adjust things to make sure that that is the case. So there's been a lot of other things that I've been thinking about in terms of that initial experience. You definitely need to okay, your initial goal is to get better equipment. The skills need to be appropriately feeling like that, and the focus of a lot of the gear is probably going to be on anti-poison stuff, because the initial game experience has a lot of enemies that can poison you. These guys have a chance to poison you. I don't think the giant bats do. Or the devil hens, but sickening soil. So there's the harrowers have sickening soil that poisons you. The giant rats have a chance to poison you. The buzzkills also have a chance to poison you. So there's just a ton of poison. So I want a lot of the early game gear to focus on resisting poison specifically, and giving you reduced chances of being poisoned and things like that. Already, one of the things that I've discovered is that the Ranger's a really good starting profession just because it has a chance to, or class. I use profession because Guild Wars drilled in my head that you call them professions, not classes, but they're character classes. The Ranger has an inbuilt 50% resist chance to every single condition, right? So that makes the Ranger super good at the beginning, because the Ranger just straight up is less likely to be poisoned, and there's just so much poison flying around. So that's some of the stuff that's been going on. Let's go ahead and stop that music. We can save changes and just kind of look at some of this stuff. We'll hit new game. So this is the one that just gives me everything right away, so I'm just going to use that one because that one's quicker. So a lot of this stuff going on here hasn't necessarily changed, but if we go look at our equipment, you can see that our equipment is dramatically less than it used to be in terms of the stuff that we're getting. This has the effect of dramatically lowering our HP and decreasing the amount of damage that we deal. This old pipe is terrible, by the way, and I need to replace it as soon as I can. It says it deals 20 to 54 damage, but there's a real good chance it's going to deal 17% of that 20. Yeah. The rusty dagger isn't great either. So on and so forth. So let's just go ahead and formation our party a little bit. I don't know. I'm going to move the warlock up into my party. And let's go ahead and put Francis in there. And, Bonpoing. I'm not pronouncing that at all correctly. So a lot of these characters still need assessment on their initial skills. But if we look at some of these initial enemy fights, they're a little bit rougher than they were because I've given you much worse equipment. But, if I go to this guy, Guarding Strike is suddenly now an attractive skill. One of the issues is Fierce Thrust is not great against some of these enemies that really resist thrusting. But, so I kind of want the next skill that he gets to be, rather than Hone Weapon, I want it to be a skill that just helps with attacking in some way. Maybe it's an attack skill that buffs, has a chance to buff him or something like that. I'm not entirely sure, but let's just attack this giant rat. Right here, though, Draining Dark now is 110 damage instead of 220. 220. So for reference, if I bring up these enemies, the giant rat has 250 HP. 220 just about one-shots it. The giant bat, yeah, like a lot of these enemies were potentially getting one-shot by it, was my experience, or darn near close. And so it's just being a little too effective. Let's go after this Buzzkill. Buzzkills need to be spelled out. So here's another issue. Poison Strike is great. Keen Eye is not. This is a buff. It's really easy to overlook the critical hit rate increased by this. The critical hit rate is fantastic and really good when you're starting with a dagger as well, because it makes the dagger hit a lot harder. But your eye gets caught up in that gain 10 MP and 9 TP whenever the user critical hits, and you just don't have a use for that. And so this skill reads worse than it is. I think Keen Eye should be obtained later and not be the initial skill that this character has. The other reason is this character does not get any TP using skills very early, and so it builds up a bunch of TP very quickly. The Keen Eye does, as well as using a dagger, which hits twice, which Francis has no use for. So I want to make that first skill something that can use that TP. This guy is in a much better place. Gains a bunch of TP off of this attack, and then can Battle Rage to deal damage to enemies based on that TP loss. So let's go ahead and set up some attacks here. Keen Eye, again, will really help the damage there. You can see that pipe really not dealing very much damage. Guarding Strike now is guarding. And Draining Dark. Hey, its fire went down. But it didn't instantly die, which is the important part here. Now, I am incentivized on Sir Lionel to just keep Guarding Strike, because it costs me TP, where just attacking does not, but it also defends me. And technically, it actually attacks a little bit more quickly. And then I can just Draining Dark the Buzzkill. It looks like it'll get it in a few turns. Let's get the Devil Hen here. That's really good. Let's go after this giant rat. Oof, that's rough over there. Yep, that's poisoned now. Poison Strike is very useful because of that. Hey, its wind went down too. Yeah, but I drained all of his TP on that. I don't know if that's a good initial skill for him. It might be a better skill to give him later. But maybe I'll leave it. I don't know. I need to think about, okay, what is this class about and how does it feel best at the beginning? And I'm not entirely sure if that is the way. And you want her to heal herself. She has very low MP. Let's just attack the Devil Hen with these guys. Actually, he should be using Opening Strike here. She does have high water, so that helps her regain MP more quickly. Yeah, no critical hits there. Whoa! The Devil Hen critical hit me. That's rough. Okay. Well, this is where I can start using Res Sig charges. I don't know. Yeah, she needs a little bit more time to gain MP back. You can see she regains MP very quickly. Because she was at 2 and she gained like 6. Because she has high water, and water gives you MP regen. Okay, let's see how well I can take that out. Yep, Francis revives. Okay, Battle Rage took down the Devil Hen pretty effectively. Actually, I should Fierce Thrust this. I can Draining Dark again. Francis actually has way more MP than Jennifer does. Jennifer has like 20. She has very low MP. Actually, I should just attack. Hmm. But see, you don't necessarily want to spend a bunch of time setting up. That's the thing. So there's a couple of other things, like minor things that I've done. This covers a lot of it. Obviously, I'm now gaining a bunch of stuff. I'm going to just go ahead and restart this, because that gives you enough of an idea. And this is another party that's fairly early. Yeah, this is just all of these weapons. So we're getting closer on these. I've thought some about the mace and what I'm going to do there and whatnot. But, you know, I have to record these at some point in time. I can't just work on it all day. So I think the last things I'm going to talk about are, one, I have begun thinking more about, okay, how these guys up here are going to work. So this first one will sell you some basic materials. This one's probably going to start selling you specific equipment that'll help you deal with the area, and specifically like adventurer's gear that has some protection against poison and things like that, and then some more higher level stuff as we go on. So I've kind of been thinking some about that early experience. The other thing that I just want to call out, if I go down here, is this now works. So I've created the transfers for that. So anyway, I think that's going to go ahead and wrap stuff up for me today. I don't know if I covered everything, but I tried to cover most of it. And like I said, there's a lot of that's the early game experience that I'm trying to figure out. I need to really pin down what my initial set of skills are going to be, especially those first 5, just to really make sure that I am making it clear this is what this class does. This is what this character does. This is how it plays, and all of that good stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up here, and until next time, everyone, take care, and goodbye.